She looked over his shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble well-governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas. But there on the shining metal, his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. That is the opening stanza of The Shield of Achilles by W.H. Auden, a poem which contrasts the idealised world of Homer's Iliad with the brutal and oppressive realities of the real world. Hephaestus, the Greek god of metalworking, is depicted crafting a shield for Achilles, son of Thetis. But unlike in Homer's Iliad, in which Achilles is a heroic figure who exacts revenge on Hector by thrusting a spear through his neck, in Auden's reimagination, Thetis finds only a barren wilderness, populated not by heroic warriors, but powerless soldiers, whose tragic fate has already been sealed. At the end of the poem, Thetis cries out in despair, because she sees that although her son is brave and strong, he would soon be dead. It is a scene which is utterly devoid of any hope, glory, or redemption. Sometimes, that is what it feels like supporting Hull City. The year that I was born, the club faced multiple High Court winding up orders and was relegated to the Football League's basement division. When I was 1, retired tennis player turned health club entrepreneur David Lloyd bought the club, attempting to kick the team out of Boothry Park, merge them with a local rugby club, and sell the existing stadium as land to be redeveloped. Lloyd sold up when extensive protests and opposition scuppered his master plan, but he retained ownership of Boothry Park, subsequently locking the club out of the stadium and leaving us homeless. That came under the ownership of Sheffield businessmen Nick Buchanan and Stephen Hinchcliffe, the latter of whom would soon be jailed for bribery and fraud. When I was 3, the club was very nearly relegated from the Football League and declared bankrupt, which most likely would have been a death sentence. Scarborough, who were relegated instead, after the Tigers pulled off a famous Great Escape, were relegated again to the Conference North in 2006, entered administration, and were dissolved. When I was 5, which is about when I started going to games, young boys not much older than myself would walk around the pitch with buckets at the end of a match, as supporters threw whatever coins and change they had into the buckets in a desperate attempt to raise funds and keep the club alive. They succeeded, and the next 7 years would bring about one of the most miraculous rises in the history of the English game, as Hull City climbed from the 4th to the 1st tier for the first time in their history in only 5 seasons. But chaos is never far away in East Yorkshire. Relegation from the Premier League 2 years later with mounting debts saw yet another meltdown and the threat of administration before local British-Egyptian multimillionaire Assem Alam stepped in to save the club. That was all going pretty well. I know, it was strange for me too, until Alam fell out with the local council, tried to change the club's name, and waged a petty and vindictive war upon the club's supporters, which resulted in he and his family ceasing to fund the club further, and telling supporters that they could die when they want. Or, in other words, normal service was resumed. It is this potted history of despots, villains and clowns running Hull City into the ground, which meant that when Turkish media mogul and government ally Acun Ilicali bought the club 3.5 years ago, I was at best cautiously optimistic, and at worst rather sceptical and cynical with regards to his talent, resources, and motivations. Hull City are a football club who have had more saviours than a particularly fickle cult member with chronic commitment issues, more false dawns than Argentina's economy, and a greater rogues gallery of ruinous owners, ranging from the incompetent to the outright malignant and even criminal, than most go-go bars in Pattaya. And so we come to the latest crisis, and the latest villain, that has prompted the latest instalment of this seemingly never-ending series, detailing the many trials and tribulations of Hull City on this channel, to an audience of people who are largely ambivalent about the club's fate, as I scream into the void like the anonymous figure depicted in Edvard Munch's 1893 masterpiece. This is the moment on Thursday evening, genuinely and accidentally captured by my girlfriend on video, that my enjoyment of good music and good vibes in Lisbon was rather rudely interrupted by a text from my dad informing me that we had been hit with a 3-window transfer embargo by the EFL, owing to unpaid debts and concerns regarding the club's long-term financial stability. About 200 notifications from people gleefully requesting another "What on earth is going on at Hull City" video swiftly followed. It has been barely 6 weeks since my last "What on earth is going on at Hull City" video, or as I prefer to put it, wow, a new PB, which touched upon the sacking of Ruben despite arriving when we were bottom of the league and guiding us to safety, the continued instability and turnover of both players and staff at the club, and why I still felt as though none of those problems would be rectified so long as Acun Ilicali was still at the helm. Boy, did that age well. Well, I'm not going to tread on too much old ground here, but if you want a comprehensive rundown and haven't already seen it, feel free to pause this video now, go back and watch that video from only 6 weeks ago, and then come back to this one. Or go all the way back to March 2020 for my first ever Hull City video and watch them all. In fact, I might even combine them all in one big 5-hour cathartic therapy dump for people to fall asleep to. When Acun Ilicali bought Hull City in January 2022 through his holding company Acun Media, he inherited an almost perfect set of circumstances for a new ownership regime. The playing squad needed strengthening, only 3 places and 7 points above the Championship relegation zone at the time, but Ilicali inherited one of the healthiest balance sheets in the EFL, about as much room to manoeuvre as is physically possible for a Championship club to have, in terms of spending and loss limits, owing to the frugality of the previous regime, and a fanbase that was immediately not only welcoming of his arrival, but practically worshipped the ground that he walked on, through gratitude towards him for ridding the club of the alums. Both financially and just optically or narratively then, it was the ideal setting for a charismatic chairman to step in and make themselves a hero. It took Ilicali just 2.5 years to rack the Tigers with debt and leave them in a regulatory dilemma. It took him an extra 12 months, until this week, for the narrative that he had spun among a majority of Hull City supporters to also fall apart. At every turn, Ilicali's ownership has been defined by recklessness, ill-decision, and a deeply ingrained narcissism, so common among the super rich, as a result of surrounding themselves with yes-men and sycophants, and never hearing the word no. Treating the Turkish Super League like Big John treats his local Chinese takeaway, Ilicali racked up a bigger bill than Captain Tom's daughter when the sweet old charity cash came rolling in. Ali Arsi, Minesh, Dokan Sinik, Adama Traore, Dimitrios Pelkas, and Abdulkadir Amir were all brought in from Ilicali's native Turkey, alongside several players who had previously played in the Super League, as Ilicali seemingly sought to realise his ambition of creating a Turkish club in England, telling one Turkish media outlet that, quote, "I want to fly Turkey's flag in the UK with Hull City success. God willing, one day I want everyone from coaches to the players at Hull to be consisting of Turks. My goal is to create a team that makes an impression in the world." End quote. Well, he has certainly made an impression. Ilicali didn't appoint a Turk, but a Georgian who had previously played and managed in the Super League, and a personal friend of his, in the form of Shota Arveladze, who had no experience or expertise of English football, and whose only managerial experience in the preceding 5 years came in Uzbekistan. Surprisingly, that wasn't a winning combination which led to promotion. Indeed, the only period of stability during Ilicali's tenure, and it was so short-lived that to even call it stability seems like too grandiose of a term, came when he appointed former Tigers fullback Liam Rosenior, who lasted all of 18 months. Rosenior took the club from a relegation scrap to the verge of the playoffs, finishing 7th in his only full season in charge, for which he was rewarded with the sack less than 5 months after Ilicali had handed him a bumper new 3-year contract. The official reason cited for Rosenior's sacking was supposedly insufficiently adventurous and entertaining football, as far as the noted football expert and tactical guru Acun Ilicali was concerned, but in a live-streamed Q&A with supporters to justify his decision that was really the beginning of the end, he also questioned Rosenior's selection decisions, singling out 2 players in particular, Ryan Alsop and Darren Connolly, for his ire. I know for a fact that this, combined with Rosenior's sacking, led to a huge loss of faith in Ilicali, both within and outside of the football club, which would have significant ramifications when it came to recruitment. So too would Ilicali's absent-mindedness throughout the following season, by his own admission, which he attributed to his newfound role as a vice-chairman at Fenerbahce, which was, apparently, much, much more important. Fenerbahce fans, for what it's worth, weren't particularly enthused about Ilicali's involvement with their club either, and after just 12 months, he was effectively hounded out by angry supporters, owing to what many considered to have been poor decision-making and ill-judged comments, most notably turning down the potential opportunity to sign Victor Osimhen on loan, who ended up joining rivals Galatasaray instead, and subsequently commenting that Fenerbahce didn't need Osimhen because they already had Cenk Tosun, Edin Dzeko, and Yusuf En-Nesyri. Galatasaray proceeded to beat Fenerbahce to the title by 11 points, with Osimhen winning the Super League Golden Boot as the standout player in the division. Fenerbahce fans are just a little bit more vociferous and significantly less forgiving than Hull City supporters. Despite the Tigers having been dealt a much worse and more permanent hand by Ilicali, there has never been any kind of formal protest or opposition to his ownership at the MKM Stadium yet. It's basically just been me on Twitter up to this point, and in increasingly frequent and annoying YouTube videos. Last season, Hull City only survived in the Championship by virtue of goal difference. Yet another manager was sacked. Of course they were. You wouldn't want to have one for more than a few months, really, would you? Reluctantly for the first time, actually, in this case, as axing German head coach Tim Walter, brought in specifically because Ilicali had endorsed his so-called heart attack football, after only 17 games was a humiliating tacit admission that sacking Rossinha had been a dreadful mistake. Not that Liam Rossinha cares, mind you. He turned down several championship offers after being sacked by Ilicali in the same season that he made the three-man shortlist for the Championship Manager of the Year award, before joining Strasbourg, who he took from 13th to 7th place in Ligue 1 in his first season in charge, qualifying for Europe, for which he was, very strangely, awarded with a contract extension, rather than being sacked. That's right, even Bleak, who own both Chelsea and Strasbourg, have far greater stability and loyalty to managers than Ilicali. At the end of the season, Ilicali sacked a fifth manager in 3.5 years and a third in only 12 months, as Ruben Sayers, who was brought in from fellow crisis club Reading, was handed his P45 less than 2 weeks after the Tigers guaranteed championship survival. This was no mean feat, given that the club was rock bottom and shipping goals for fun when Sayers came in. Under his stewardship, Hull had the best defensive record in the Championship outside of the top three, top half results, which would put them 12th during his time in charge, and they survived on the final day of the season by virtue of having a far superior goal difference to Luton Town. That might seem like a decent rescue job to the untrained eye, but according to Ilicali, survival was never the aim. He was targeting... Sorry, am I reading this right? A top 10 finish and a playoff push.
I want to moonwalk, son, but life's a shithouse.
This is both obviously insane, just utter drivel, the ramblings of a madman drunk on his own delusions, and with absolutely no one around him to rein him in, and also entirely predictable, based upon a long-established trend now of him doing and saying terminally idiotic things. There was widespread shock among followers of the Championship and the wider football community when Sayers was sacked, but the actual surprise here would have been if he hadn't been sacked and Hull City had decided to do something remotely sensible. Ruben Sayers, like Liam Rossinha, has been done a favour by Acun Ilicali. He has left a club that was bottom of the league when he arrived and has just been hit by a 3-window transfer embargo to join a club an hour down the road that was in a championship playoff final and won more than 90 points last season. Sayers has been replaced by Sergej Jikirovic, a former Bosnian international who has won league titles in both Bosnia and Croatia, but most recently completed a successful rescue mission at Kayserispor in Ilicali's native Turkey. Jikirovic revealed in a recent interview that his stated aim this season, upon which he will be judged, is finishing in the top 10. Good luck with that now, Sergej. I'm just surprised that the target isn't automatic promotion, scoring more goals each week than the average basketball game, and resolving the Russo-Ukrainian war. And let's face it, he could do all of those things, and he would most likely still be sacked. Since Acun Ilicali bought Hull City, the club's gross and net debt have more than doubled, rising from £29.2 and £28.8 million to £65.9 and £65.8 million. The wage bill has also more than doubled, up from £12.7 to £29.6 million in the last set of accounts. Overall operating expenses have, you guessed it, more than doubled, up from £21.3 to £42.8 million. Player amortisation costs have more than trebled, up from £1.6 to £4.7 million, and agents' fees have increased by an eye-watering 13 times, or over 12,000%, from just £243,000 a few years ago to £3.17 million now. That was the highest figure in the Championship outside of the relegated clubs in receipt of enormous parachute payments, but again, it isn't that surprising, given that Hull City signed virtually an entire new first-team squad every season, and often half a new team every half-season. In a recent live-streamed Q&A, yes, another one, he really likes doing them, and why wouldn't he, when they have been such a roaring success previously? Acun Ilicali dismissed any questions regarding the club's economic stability and financial outlook, appearing almost bemused that anyone would ask such a question, and claimed that all of the club's debts were owed to him and that, since he had no intention of calling those debts in, fans had nothing to worry about. Ilicali stated, and I quote, "We don't have financial problems. It's true we are spending too much money. I have passion. Sometimes you can have little technical problems. The club has loans. But those loans are to me. I will not ask for all the loans." End quote. Just so that we're all clear on the timeline here, that was 3 days before news broke regarding the EFL's transfer or fee embargo, unpaid debts, and the league's concerns regarding the club's finances. So, just the stupidest timeline imaginable, really. Of course, as is becoming not so much of a theme as an eternal truism, Ilicali's claim about the club's debt was total nonsense, exposed by the club's officially published accounts, which presumably he was relying on no one ever looking at, including the EFL. It is true that most of Hull City's debt, almost exactly 2/3, is owed to him, or Acun Media to be more precise. The remaining third, though, totalling £22 million in external debt, is the fourth highest external debt in the Championship and, once again, the highest among clubs who haven't recently been relegated from the Premier League and in receipt of grossly distorting parachute payments. I know, right? Just when you think that you can take someone at their word. I'm beginning to think that I might also not be able to trust him when he claimed that racism doesn't exist in Turkey, and that it isn't racist to say racist things, up to and including calling black people the N-word, if you don't mean it. And yes, those are both actual things that he has actually said this summer, defending his first-choice managerial target to replace Ruben, namely Emre Belözoğlu, who is perhaps the most prolific and high-profile convicted racist in world football, who he was very upset about not being able to appoint after supporters, and local journalists loudly opposed the idea. This is one of the gripes that I sometimes have about how charitable some Hull City supporters have been towards Acun Ilicali, although probably not anymore, treating him as though he is some kind of small child who repeatedly soils his nappy in public, but who is well-meaning and just doesn't know any better, and who knows, maybe this time he'll learn from his mistakes, before he proceeds to soil himself 10 times harder all over again. This is a guy who has now either owned or co-owned 4 different football clubs, and been the vice president and head of football operations of a 5th, whose wealth accumulation accelerated rapidly, along with a handful of other Turkish media moguls, when his ally President Erdogan clamped down on press freedoms following Turkey's 2016 failed coup attempt, and who has very publicly excused racism by someone who is a close friend and who he wanted to appoint as manager of a football club that a little over a year ago was forced to condemn racist abuse towards our then manager Liam Rosenior. I don't think that these are the hallmarks of a lovable rogue who's just made a few misguided decisions. While initial reaction to the news of Hull City's embargo speculated that it might have something to do with a reported £1 million loan fee owed to Aston Villa for the half-season loan of Louis Barry, Another utterly insane deal, but we don't have time for that now. It has since been reported that the problems run much deeper than that. It appears the Tigers did owe Villa the loan fee for Barry, with some speculating that they might have been holding off on payments in an attempt to have it forgiven or reduced as part of a permanent deal for the youngster, but that they actually owe money to multiple creditors, including clubs and businesses, who have raised concerns and reported the club to the authorities. It also isn't the case, as some people very optimistically posited, that the club just sort of accidentally forgot to pay the Barry bill on time, and it is all some kind of big misunderstanding. The EFL don't tend to just slap embargoes on clubs for narrowly missing payment dates. They will have been in regular contact with the club, seeking a resolution to the situation and a viable route out of it. It is reported that the Tigers are now over 3 months overdue on payments to multiple creditors, which they have been either unwilling or unable to resolve. This has been on the EFL's radar for some time, along with growing and ongoing concerns regarding the club's overall financial stability, with recent events only constituting the final straw. Whenever Ilicali has addressed financial concerns, he's tended to do so through the prism of spending and loss limits, complaining that the league's regulations were holding the club back, and that it was a fine balancing act of spending as much as possible without breaking the rules each season. It's just worth noting, therefore, that Hull City's recent sanctions aren't due to regulatory issues or breaching spending or loss limits. The Tigers' accounts aren't in great shape, following 3.5 years of mismanagement and overspending on Ilicali's part, including some of the worst signings and contract agreements in the history of the club, but they are no worse than a handful of other championship clubs. The problem is an apparent lack of will or ability, or both, on the part of the owner to provide funds, which, that's much worse, isn't it? It has also been reported that Louis Barry's loan fee to Aston Villa has now been paid, though it is unclear both why the club waited to be under an embargo to do it, and whether or not other creditors have also been paid. It is doubtful that the resolution of Barry's outstanding loan fee alone will be enough to satisfy the EFL, who have concerns over whether the club is actually capable of continuing to spend, increasing their debt pile, and paying creditors either on time or at all. In other words, then, the EFL embargo is not only a punishment for the late or non-payment of debts by their stated deadlines, it is an attempt to save the club from themselves and from Acun Ilicali. If only they'd done it 3 years ago, they could have also saved us from Dokan Cynic. It's also slightly amusing, or at least it would be if this wasn't my club, that Ilicali has repeatedly talked of his relationship with the Aston Villa leadership, and particularly co-owner Nassef Saviraz, only for his supposed friend or friends to have complained to the EFL about us being over 100 days late on paying them a loan fee, landing us in a transfer embargo, or a fee embargo, and yet another crisis. Ilicali stated literally days ago, in relation to an attempt to sign Louis Barry on a permanent basis, quote, "I'm personally involved in this transfer because of my relationship with Monchi and Mr. Saviraz." End quote. Maybe that wasn't such a good relationship after all, or maybe he never was friends with him and Ilicali just made the whole thing up to begin with. Who knows at this stage? It would hardly be out of character. It's also pretty funny, and I can't even deny that this is funny despite it being my club, that Ilicali appeared to confirm in his live Q&A just a few days ago, before all of this broke, that he had granted Sky Sports behind-the-scenes access to follow him next season and make a fly-on-the-wall documentary about the club, of the kind that there now seems to be about roughly half of the 92. So that should be a fun watch. Just 8 episodes of people calling him, asking where their money is, no one being signed because we are under a fee embargo, and Ilicali sacking Jakirovic after 10 games because we're not yet top of the league. Ironically, 14 months ago, back when it was positively sacrilege and tantamount to blasphemy among some Hull City fans to engage in even the mildest critique of the ownership, I tweeted, "It seems the noticing that our owner is absolutely batshit has begun. It would make for a great Netflix documentary, not such a great way to run a football club. Sometimes, I would like to be less prescient. This is one of those times. Forget the Tinder swindler. This season, it's all about the Tiger swindler. Football's answer to Fire Festival, only with less Kendall Jenner and more Semi Ajayi. If the embargo is upheld upon appeal, and there is no reason to believe that it won't be, the reality for Hull City is bleak. I mean, of course, it is regardless, isn't it? Let's be honest, but even bleaker still. The Tigers were the lowest scorers in the entire championship last season and have already lost their top scorer, joint second highest scorer, and joint fourth highest scorer from last season, with no one so far brought in to replace them, and, most likely, now no one able to be. They only scored 5, 6 and 3 goals last season, but that's just how dire the Tigers were in front of goal. It also means that Oscar Zambrano, another brainless arrival from LDU Quito, who the club signed knowing that he was facing a likely doping ban, and who has since been banned from the sport for doping for 12 months, won't be able to be signed on a permanent basis. The justification for bringing in Zambrano for a season and paying his wages, when he was banned after just 8 appearances, was supposed to be a long-term one, in which the club signed him permanently, waited for his ban to expire, and then reaped the rewards. Instead, the embargo means that we just paid a convicted drug cheat for an entire season for absolutely no good reason, and still, somehow, he was a better signing than Dokan Cynic, Ryan Giles, and Louis Barry. The club may well be forced to try and reintegrate Ryan Giles now, one of the highest paid players at the club, who has been absolutely hopeless since his big money arrival from Luton Town. Otherwise, they face going another season without a recognised left-back. In midfield, both Steven Alzate and Gustavo Puerta were expected to depart, but that would leave the club with midfield options thinner than Wayne Rooney's hair at the 2010 World Cup, and it's also recently been reported that Puerta might not even be able to be signed or registered, owing to the financial and EFL embargo issues. Bloody hell. Mohamed Baloumi, Liam Miller, and a little bit later on Elliot Matazo are expected to return from ACL injuries next season, and will hopefully be like new signings. I say hopefully because, of course, there probably won't be any actual new signings from this point onwards. What a time to be alive. There's also the possibility of what is left of the Tigers' most valuable assets, like Ivor Panda, Charlie Hughes, and, when he returns, Mohamed Baloumi, seeking departures in light of the turmoil that the club is in, or the club being forced to make sales in order to raise funds and pay creditors, leaving what is already, respectfully, a deeply troubled squad in a state of absolute despair and at very high risk of relegation. The club now has to turn to an academy that has been shamefully neglected under the current calamitous ownership, leaving us heading into a new season with yet another manager, woeful preparation and pre-season turmoil, and in a state of near-permanent flux, chaos, and confusion. But other than that, things are going pretty well. The warning signs for Hull City have been there for some time. Last season, on the eve of the all-important final match of the campaign, news broke that players' wages hadn't been paid on time. Players didn't go unpaid, as has been the case at Sheffield Wednesday in recent weeks, and the payments weren't so late as to incur the wrath of the FA or the EFL, though no doubt it didn't exactly improve the EFL's dim view of the club's finances that they were already monitoring. In an interview with Mike White at the end of the season, the same one where he said that racism doesn't exist in Turkey, and that it's not racist to racially abuse people if you don't mean it, Ilicali berated the local journalist for having the sheer temerity to ask manager Ruben Sayers about the news that players had gone unpaid before the game, seemingly, and you can all go and listen to this yourself because he thought that he was bringing down the mood and spreading bad vibes before a big game. Of course, that could have been avoided if the club had, paid the players on time, meaning that there wouldn't have been a news story about the players not getting paid on time to ask the manager about on the eve of a huge final day of the season, but then, that is typical of Ilicali and those around him, never accepting any responsibility for their mistakes or displaying any contrition, outraged by even the mildest scrutiny, and always blaming someone else. These are the traits of many a ruinous football club owner, both at Hull City and elsewhere. Since arriving at Hull City, Acun Ilicali's slogan, if you like, has been one family, one dream. That has since been updated to one family, one dream, many debts, most of them unpaid. Oh, and did I say dream? Sorry, I meant nightmare. And it's actually the Addams family. A bit less punchy, admittedly, but certainly much more accurate. There is a wider context to all of this. Hull City aren't the only championship club under a transfer embargo, or fee embargo. Leicester City and Sheffield Wednesday are in the same boat, with Leicester expecting an imminent points deduction for both Premier League and Championship PSR breaches, after the leagues closed previous loopholes that the Foxes had exploited via the courts. Meanwhile, Wednesday are in arguably an even worse predicament than the Tigers, with players as well as creditors having gone unpaid, with Dapon Chansiri's ownership posing an existential risk to the future viability of their club. English football has the greatest depth throughout the pyramid, in terms of talent, intrigue and certainly support, of any lower league system in any country in the world, bar none. And yet, financially, it is a house of cards waiting to collapse, crushed under the weight of the biggest and richest league in the world, facing ever-increasing operational costs, ever higher losses, and ever-mounting debts. The average championship club now loses around £500,000 a week, or £26 million a year, spends their entire turnover or more on their wage bill alone, and has absolutely zero prospect of ever becoming remotely sustainable, let alone profitable, without winning promotion to the Premier League, something which is becoming ever more difficult to do due to the total dominance of clubs in receipt of parachute payments, who routinely occupy at least 2, if not all 3 of the promotion places. Hull City and Sheffield Wednesday are especially poorly run clubs with especially malignant and or incapable owners, but the league and the system as a whole is totally unsustainable. Clubs are reliant upon the goodwill of strangers, and I really do mean strangers in most cases, to stay in business, and as soon as they fall into the wrong hands, which is hardly a rare occurrence, they are thrown into an existential crisis. 17 years ago, Dean Windass was Hull City's Achilles, and the journey from the old 4th Division to the Premier League was our Iliad. As a wide-eyed 12-year-old boy, English football appeared to me to be thrilling, glorious, and full of hope. Now, as a 29-year-old unk, as some younger viewers of this channel insist upon calling me, it appears as a barren wilderness where supporters have been rendered powerless in determining the predestined fate of their clubs, which in many cases is literal or figurative death. And I, like Thetis, am left crying out in despair, just in the form of ever more frequent Hull City videos. Sheffield Wednesday and Morecambe will doubtless be next, but the reality is that making videos about crisis clubs in English football these days is a never-ending task, as there is an endless supply of them. It would be nice if it wasn't my club quite so often though. Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much for staying with me for the entirety of this therapy session. I appreciate that. It means a lot. And for not charging. That's good of you. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Presumably you're sick in the head. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And make sure, as I always say, that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel, where I mainly just sort of moan about Hull City now, but also my second channel, Alfie Potshamer, where there's a video of me moaning about the Hull City women's team. So, you know, nice to mix things up sometimes. You can now also support me additionally, either via the Alfie Potshamer YouTube channel. You can become a member there or leave a super thanks on one of the videos. Or even better still, via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potshamer, where you can also become a loyal channel member or donator, and that comes with a whole series of quite incredible perks, should you wish to do so. All of those links are down in the video description below. You can also find me on social media via usually the username @HITC7s, should you wish to do so. But I'll see you in the next one, probably in a few days' time when we've been liquidated. Have a good one until then. I love you all lots. Cheers. Bye.